James didn't think of himself as unlucky. He just thought he was tired. At 32, his life looked fine from the outside. He had a stable job, a small rented flat, and a routine that worked. He woke up early, commuted, answered emails, attended meetings, and came home in the evening with just enough energy to make dinner and scroll through his phone. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was moving either. Every month felt the same. Bills went out. Savings barely grew. Promotions were always under consideration. James wasn't desperate, just quietly frustrated in a way that never made enough noise to demand change. He didn't complain. Complaining felt pointless. On a Tuesday evening, after another long day that blurred into the last, James sat on his sofa with his laptop open and his phone in his hand. He wasn't searching for anything specific. Just browsing. Reading. Letting time pass. That's when the email arrived. The subject line was simple. Private opportunity, invitation only. James would normally delete something like that without thinking. He was careful. He'd learned to be. But this one didn't look careless or loud. No spelling mistakes. No promises of overnight wealth. Just a short message, professionally written. It said he'd been recommended based on his background. It didn't explain how. It didn't need to. Curiosity did the rest. He opened it. The email described a small investment group focused on short-term digital trades. It emphasized low exposure, conservative strategies, and gradual returns. There was no pressure, no urgency, just an invitation to learn more if he was interested. At the bottom was a name and a company website. James clicked the link. The site looked clean. Minimal. Calm. It wasn't flashy or aggressive. There were testimonials, but they weren't emotional, just matter-of-fact statements about steady growth and disciplined strategy. The language felt restrained. Mature. That was what convinced him to keep reading. Over the next few days, James did what he always did when something felt uncertain. He researched. He checked the domain. He looked up the company name. He didn't find anything alarming. He didn't find much at all, which made sense for something described as private. Eventually, another email arrived. This one invited him to a short call. Optional. No obligation. James hesitated. He didn't need this. He wasn't struggling. But he was tired of standing still. He agreed to the call. The voice on the other end was calm, unhurried, and professional. The man didn't oversell. He didn't promise specific numbers. He spoke about risk management, discipline, and patience. Things James respected. When James asked questions, the answers didn't feel rehearsed. The man admitted there were risks. He even discouraged investing more than a small amount at first. That's how we prefer it, the man said. You should never trust something you haven't tested. That line stayed with James. After the call, there was no follow-up pressure. No countdown. No reminders. A week passed. Then another email arrived, thanking him for the conversation and offering access to a trial group, limited, optional, and temporary. The entry amount was small. Small enough not to matter if it disappeared. James thought about it for 2 days. He thought about his savings account, barely changing month after month. He thought about how careful he'd always been and how little that had given him. He thought about how this didn't feel reckless. It felt measured. So he transferred the money. Nothing happened immediately. No excitement. No alerts. No messages. Then, about 10 days later, he received a notification. A modest return. Exactly what had been described. James didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded to himself, the way people do when something confirms what they hoped but didn't expect. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated. Small gains. Clear records. Transparent update. James didn't tell anyone. There was no reason to. It wasn't life-changing. It wasn't even impressive. But it was steady. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had stepped onto a path that went somewhere. Inside the private group chat, conversations were polite and focused. People shared observations, not excitement. No one bragged. No one panicked. That, more than anything, made James feel safe. When a new message appeared suggesting a slightly higher allocation for those who felt comfortable, James didn't respond right away. He read it twice. Closed the app. Thought about it. He remembered what the man had said on the call, never trust something you haven't tested. But hadn't he tested it? Weeks passed. The numbers remained consistent. James increased his contribution, not by much, just enough to matter. And when the next update arrived, the return matched expectations again. That night, James slept better than he had in months. Not because he was richer, but because he finally believed he was doing something right. He didn't notice the small changes then. The subtle shift in tone. The way conversations began focusing more on opportunity than caution. It all still felt reasonable. And that was the problem. James didn't feel reckless. That was the important thing. If anything, he felt careful, more careful than most people he knew. He tracked numbers. He read updates properly instead of skimming them. He avoided emotional decisions. This wasn't gambling. This was controlled. At least, that's how it felt. By the second month, the group had grown slightly. A few new names appeared in the chat, each introduced briefly by the moderator. No fanfare. No excitement. Just quiet acknowledgements. James noticed that people who asked too many questions didn't stay long. They weren't removed, they just stopped posting. Their names faded into the background of the chat history. That didn't bother him. Everyone had different tolerances for uncertainty. The updates continued to arrive on schedule. Clean summaries. Clear figures. No sudden spikes. No alarming drops. Everything behaved the way it was supposed to. James began checking the app more often. Not obsessively, just out of habit. The way people check the weather or their bank balance. It was reassuring to see progress, even small amounts. One evening, while cooking dinner, his phone buzzed. A message from the group moderator. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular. Just a general note explaining that the strategy had entered a strong cycle and that those comfortable with increased exposure could opt in. There was no pressure. No language about missing out. Just information. James ignored it at first. Later that night, lying in bed, he opened the message again. He ran the numbers in his head. Even if it went wrong, the amount suggested wouldn't hurt him long term. He still had savings. He still had his job. And it had worked so far. He opted in. The next few weeks went by quietly. Life outside the app stayed the same. Work meetings. Commutes. Groceries. Bills. Inside the app, returns increased slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to feel meaningful. James caught himself doing something new, imagining outcomes. Not fantasies of quitting his job or buying something extravagant. Just small thoughts. Padding his savings. Reducing stress. Maybe saying yes to things he usually avoided because they felt too expensive. It wasn't greed. It was relief. At work, a colleague mentioned investing during a lunch break. James listened but didn't share anything. This wasn't something he wanted opinions on. It felt personal. Private. The group chat grew more active. Members began sharing appreciation for the moderators. Nothing excessive, just polite acknowledgements. James noticed the tone had shifted slightly. The language was still calm, but there was more confidence now. More certainty. When someone asked about potential downsides, the response was measured but firm. All strategies carry risk, the moderator wrote. That's why discipline matters. That sounded reasonable. Then came the first delay. It was minor. A routine update arrived a few hours later than usual. No explanation. No apology. James noticed, but didn't think much of it. Systems weren't perfect. Delays happened. The numbers were still there. The returns still made sense. A few days later, another message arrived explaining that some funds had been temporarily reallocated and withdrawals might take slightly longer during this period. James read it carefully. The word temporary stood out. He wasn't planning to withdraw anything anyway. This was long-term. He reminded himself of that and moved on. Still, something had changed. Not in the data, in the feeling. He found himself checking the chat more often, reading messages twice, scanning for tone rather than information. When a member asked directly about withdrawal timelines, the moderator responded politely but vaguely. No exact dates. Just reassurance. James didn't like that. But he didn't act on the discomfort either. The next update arrived late again. This time by a full day. The returns were still positive, but smaller. James stared at the screen longer than usual. He told himself not to overreact. Markets fluctuated. Strategies adjusted. That was normal. When he tried to message support privately, the response came several hours later. Short. Professional. Reassuring. Too reassuring. James considered withdrawing a portion of his funds, just to test the system. The thought lingered in his mind all evening. But he didn't do it. Pulling out now would mean admitting doubt. And doubt, he told himself, was emotional. He wasn't an emotional investor. The following week, another message arrived announcing a new internal structure. Nothing drastic, just an improvement, according to the explanation. More efficiency. Better scaling. James didn't fully understand it. That bothered him more than he expected. He reread earlier updates, comparing language. The clarity he'd appreciated at the beginning seemed slightly dulled now. Not gone, just less precise. When he searched the company name again online, he noticed something new. Still nothing negative. But still nothing verifiable either. No updates. No mentions. No footprint. That night, James slept poorly. The next morning, he opened the app and saw a notification, withdrawal request pending. He hadn't made one. His chest tightened. A moment later, another message appeared explaining that a system check had automatically queued certain accounts for review. It was routine, the message said. Nothing to worry about. James sat at his desk, staring at the screen. He wanted to believe it. He wanted things to stay the way they were. He told himself that if this were a problem, there would be signs, real signs. He hadn't lost anything. The numbers were still there. Still, for the first time since joining, James closed the app not feeling reassured, but unsettled. He didn't know it yet, but the decision he didn't make that morning, the withdrawal he didn't submit, was the last easy exit he would have. James didn't tell anyone. Not at work. Not to friends. Not even to himself, really. He kept going to the office. He answered emails. He sat in meetings and nodded when expected. On the surface, nothing had changed. But his phone stayed close. Every break, he checked the app. The pending message was still there. Hours passed. Then a full day. That night, James tried to withdraw a small amount. Not everything. Just enough to feel sure. The request went through. No error. No warning. That should have helped. It didn't. The next morning, the group chat was quieter. A few people asked about delays. The replies were polite but short. Always the same tone. Calm. Controlled. James sent a private message to support. No reply. By the afternoon, the app stopped refreshing. The numbers froze. They didn't go down. They didn't move at all. James told himself it was a technical issue. That evening, he searched the company name again. This time, he added the word review. Nothing useful came up. Just the same empty pages. The same clean site. He checked the domain details again. Still active. Still normal. That was the worst part. Nothing clearly wrong. The next day, the app wouldn't load. No error message. Just a blank screen. The group chat was gone. James felt something drop in his chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just a heavy feeling he couldn't explain. He emailed the address from the first message. It bounced back. He tried the website. It was still there, but some pages didn't load. James sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He didn't move. He didn't eat. By the end of the day, the site was gone. No message. No warning. No goodbye. James finally said it out loud. It's gone. The money wasn't the hardest part. It hurt, but it didn't ruin him. He could recover from that. What stayed with him was the silence. No one to argue with. No one to explain. No one to blame. He thought about the moment he first felt unsure. The day he almost withdrew. The warning he pushed aside because it felt small. He went back to work the next week like nothing had happened. He didn't tell anyone. It felt easier that way. But he was different. He read emails more slowly. He questioned things more. He trusted less. Months later, he received a message from a stranger online. The name was familiar. Someone from the group. They didn't ask for help. They didn't offer answers. They just said, "I should have left when you thought about it." James didn't reply. He closed the message and sat there, staring at the screen. He had learned something, but not in the way people like to talk about lessons. There was no growth moment. No sudden wisdom. Just a quiet understanding. Some mistakes don't shout. They wait.